We are pleased to be joined by United States Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator Murphy is the author of the three-part report, Madness, Inc., How College Sports Can Leave Athletes Broken and Abandoned. Senator Murphy, thank you very much for joining us today. You've been a leader on analyzing and exposing the ways in which colleges and the NCAA have treated, many would argue, mistreated college athletes through the system of amateurism. Before we talk about name, image, and likeness, what are your broader goals with college sports reform?
Well, thanks for having me on. First and foremost, I come at this issue as a huge sports fan. Frankly, I would have paid money to play college athletics. I wasn't good enough, but I love it. College basketball, college football. And because I follow it so closely, I haven't been able to ignore the fact that this has become a $14 billion industry. The size of college sports in terms of the amount of money it makes has tripled over the course of the last 15 years. And there are lots of white male adults who are becoming millionaires and billionaires off of college sports, while these kids who are actually putting the product on the field are remaining in poverty, often destitution, sometimes undergoing serious injury through their exploits and getting zero compensation for it. The college sports industry increasingly treats these kids like commodities. And you see that most acutely during the pandemic, when in some cases schools are closed down, students aren't going to class in person, but the athletes are competing in person because the school needs the money. And so I don't want college sports to go away. I just want student athletes to be treated fairly. I want them to be able to share in some of the profit that is being made. I want there to be health and safety protections so that they don't endure life-altering injuries as a mechanism to make money for other adults. So while we're talking right now about this sort of issue of protecting athletes during the COVID pandemic and potentially allowing them to make money off endorsement deals, I would rather see a much more comprehensive conversation about why this is the only industry in the United States where we restrict the earnings of the people who are actually doing the lion's share of the work. And until we change that, I think this remains a festering civil rights issue in the United States of America. All of these white people making millions and billions of dollars off of the labor of largely African-American males.
So would you say this is maybe even more a civil rights issue than, say, one of economic freedom? Some of your colleagues have framed it more as it's about freedom of contract, it's about economic liberty. Do you see it more in the direction of really civil rights and race, as you just noted?
I don't. I think it is equal parts a civil rights issue and an issue of economic freedom and the free market, which is why I think this issue does have the potential to be bipartisan. I convened a working group on college athletics with Senator Mitt Romney. We had conservative Republicans as part of that group, progressive Democrats, because there are lots of Republicans, who may not care as much as I do about the civil rights aspect, but can't understand why we would allow for the bargaining rights of players, the wage rights, the income rights of players to be restricted in a way that we don't in any other industry in the United States. So I think we've got the potential for major reform, potentially through legislative action, because there are elements of this debate that speak both to injustices perceived by Democrats and progressives and Republicans and conservatives.
Senator Murphy, what do you say to those who say, we hear you, but if college athletes are signing endorsement deals, everyone's going to lose because fans will be repelled, fewer people will be fans of their alma mater, less money will go into the pie of college sports. So yeah, they'll be able to sign endorsement deals, but the net will be a diminished product. Do you think there's any validity to that?
I think there's zero validity to that. I think that's a wonderful argument for these coaches who are making $5 million a year to make so that they can continue to make $5 million. Why wasn't the value of watching college athletics diminished when coaches started making $1 million salaries and strength coaches started making $1 million? we didn't seem to care less about college athletics when the white coaches started getting paid. Why would we care less about college athletics if the largely black athletes started getting a little bit of money, a small amount of money compared to how much those coaches are making? By the way, largely in order to protect against the future losses that they will endure. Remember, these are athletes, especially in football, that are likely undergoing injury to their brain, to their body, that is going to limit their ability to make money through athletic exploits or physical exploits later on in life. And so at the very least, we should be making sure that they have some degree of compensation to be able to make up for or pay for the costs of those injuries over time. So no, I just don't believe that argument that if we start providing a little bit of compensation to athletes that folks are going to stop caring about college athletics.
So for decades, as you know, the NCAA fiercely resisted name, image, and likeness rights. We saw that in the Ed O'Bannon case. They've come around to some extent, no doubt because of pressure from members of the Senate and members of the House, and also just public pressure and media influence, and of course, Ed O'Bannon's case. Do you think that their most recent proposal, there's a Division I proposal, which talks about granting name, image, and likeness rights with so-called guardrails, is the word that's been used, one of which is that college athletes wouldn't be able to sign deals with sports wagering companies, and yet we see colleges signing sponsorship deals with sports wagering companies. I mean, what are your thoughts on the latest from the NCAA? Is it enough?
No, it's totally unworkable. What the NCAA has proposed is a series of Rube Goldberg-like restrictions on athletes that would just get them in more trouble rather than provide them with adequate compensation. The NCAA cannot be in charge of athletes' rights to endorsement deals, because if you put the NCAA in charge, their restrictions will be so onerous as to make the right totally impractical, because the NCAA doesn't want to give up any of the money they're making. The NCAA wants to make all the money off of the merchandise, off of the athletic gear, off of the deals that are done with sports betting companies. They don't want to share in all of that revenue. And so if you put the NCAA in charge of what students can, what kind of endorsement deals students can enter into and what they can't, then there will be no right at all. I think by now, especially in the middle of this pandemic, we have learned that the NCAA's interest is not protecting these kids. The NCAA's interest is on keeping the money train flowing for these schools and for this vast industry of apparel companies and sports betting companies and TV networks that make money off of this industry. So let's give students a broad right to be able to sign endorsement deals, and let's not put the NCAA in charge of limiting that right.
How about the NCAA having a role with sports agents? You noted that you're skeptical of the NCAA trying to protect college athletes, but do you worry at all about a total free market where sports agents are on campus? You know, we know that narrative. Is that a worry to you? And if it is, do you have in mind a sensible system for addressing how agents would be certified or regulated or some combination of that?
Well, I think that's a worthwhile discussion to sort of figure out what role agents would play. But, you know, I watched a State Farm ad with Nick Saban when I was watching a game this weekend. I imagine Nick Saban has an agent that got him that deal. Again, I just don't accept this premise that the coaches can have agents. The coaches can do whatever endorsement deals they want, but the students can't. What has taught us over the last 20 years of watching college recruitment scandals that the coaches have virtue that the students lack, right? We're trying to protect students, which I think is a noble enterprise, but giving coaches unfettered access to making as much money as they can, when the coaches, in fact, have been the ones that over and over again have told us that they are willing to break and bend the rules in order to advance their own personal athletic and coaching careers. So yeah, let's be careful about how we bring agents into college football, but let's not assume that these athletes are rule breakers and assume that the coaches are angels and saints.
Senator Murphy, you mentioned that this topic brings on bipartisan support, that you have progressives and conservatives viewing it maybe from different perspectives, but reaching the same basic conclusion. 5 states, as you know, have adopted NIL statutes. Florida is set to take effect next July. What's the timeline here? Is Congress going to act before the states take action in terms of their statutes going into effect? Will Congress defer to college sports? I mean, are there enough of you, Republicans and Democrats, to actually really do something here?
Well, as you mentioned, you have a clock ticking. There are a number of states that have and will pass these laws granting endorsement rights to athletes. They conflict with each other. They're not all standardized, and thus it makes for a very messy system of endorsement rights across the NCAA without federal action to try to standardize this right. Your question is whether Congress will act in time. I don't know. I talked to a lot of my Republican colleagues who, frankly think that Congress should stay out of this altogether. There are a bunch of Republicans who are going to be uninterested in any federal legislation. They would, frankly, rather have state laws control. Query whether you can actually sort of have a national college basketball or college football season with level playing fields if every state's endorsement deal law is different. So I think it's going to be difficult to pass federal legislation. You've got many Republicans who don't want anything to happen. Then you've got many Democrats who think that we should go further than just legislating on name, image, and likeness, that we should sort of more broadly allow for the compensation of athletes, and that we should enact other health and safety protections. So I think it's not impossible, but it's going to be very difficult to get a piece of federal legislation passed.
Well, building on that, a broader set of rights for college athletes. As you know, college athletes, some have sought to be declared employees of their school and then potentially unionized. Northwestern football players tried that. The National Labor Relations Board sort of punted on it. One big issue is that the National Labor Relations Act isn't really designed in a way that makes that readily accessible. Would you consider, and I know you've proposed ideas along these lines, changing federal law, specifically labor law, to allow college athletes to have a broader set of rights?
I would, and I'm examining what would need to be changed right now in order to provide college athletes with that right to organize and bargain collectively. So that is an ongoing discussion that is happening right now amongst my colleagues. And as I mentioned, it is an example of a set of rights that we think it makes sense to grant to college athletes. Frankly, the NCAA and colleges should have done themselves long ago, but refused to. For instance, a guarantee of health insurance, a right to freely transfer from one school to the next. And one interesting change in law that I think may have broad Republican and Democratic support is a right to go straight to the pros. The sort of secret here is that the NFL in particular and the NBA to an extent get a free minor leagues. They don't have to pay for a minor league because the brand names are built by colleges, especially college football programs. And so one of the things I think could get broad bipartisan support is a federal law saying that the NFL and the NBA cannot stop a high school athlete from going straight to the pros. And I think that would, fundamentally in and of itself change the bargaining power that exists for student athletes if they aren't forced to play college football as they are today if they want an NFL career. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and we know that federal law on age discrimination protects those 40 and up, but as you just noted, there's a very compelling argument that those who are younger, who are in this unique state where they have a limited window of life to earn money playing a sport, perhaps should be protected as well under a potential law along the lines you described. Senator, my last question, and thank you so much for your time with this interview, is to what extent are you aware, or do you have an instinct about President-elect Biden's views about college sports reform or NIL? Obviously, this topic didn't get a lot of attention during the election, but now with President-elect Biden coming in, do you have a sense of what leadership he'll take on this?
Yeah, I actually don't. That's a good question. I've been so busy trying to make sure that he gets elected. I didn't, necessarily do my homework on what he has said or done on the issue of college sports rights. What I do know about this, our president-elect, is that he is someone that has credibility on both sides of the aisle. He's somebody that has cut bipartisan deals in the past, and as we've talked about, especially if Congress remains divided, if Republicans continue to control the Senate, then anything you're going to do in this space has to have bipartisan support. And Joe Biden is someone that has historically been able to bridge some pretty significant differences. So I look forward to sitting down with him, sort of talking very early on to his new Secretary of Education to see if we can work together on a bipartisan package of reforms to college sports.
Well, Senator Murphy, thank you so much for your time today. We know how busy you are, especially in the aftermath of the election, and we wish you the best, and thanks for being part of this event.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.